Hey everybody, Super Vader 400 here, back for another retro review, and this time this is my review of the entire Dragon Ball Anthrology. That's from Dragon Ball all the way up to Dragon Ball Super. That's all of the Dragon Ball anime series, and the first one I got to start off with is the original Dragon Ball. And as always, as anyone knows who's seen my Dog A798 videos, I do not like the original Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. I think both of them, by today's standards, are both overrated, terrible, and mediocre. And the only things they're really good for is nostalgia. Is nostalgia. That's pretty much the only thing it's good for. But this channel is dedicated to positive reviews. So this is stuff you actually like about the original Dragon Ball series, and there really isn't much that I like about this series except for pretty much the characters. The characters. I think the plot is simplistic and kind of. I think the plot is simplistic and terrible. 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 The fight sequences, in my opinion, the action sequences, while they got better later, in my opinion, by today's standards, they're really not all that good. Only things I like are pretty much the characters with different abilities, and the various power ups and special maneuvers they can do. They can do, and the only thing I like of, oh yeah, the only other thing I like about this particular series, the original Dragon Ball, see, this is when characters, this is when there are no androids, cyborgs, robots, mutants, bio warriors, aliens in this series. So this series was more human, and while still being fantasy, was a little bit more grounded in reality. There wasn't like any Super Saiyans around, so human characters like Tien, Yamcha, Krillin, and Chaozu, and even Roshi were more useful and were more involved in the fights. There was actually at one point where Roshi was probably pretty much was one of the most powerful people on Earth. When Tien first showed up, he was one of the most powerful people on Earth, and when Piccolo showed up, he was the most powerful being on Earth, and there was nothing like him at the time when when the entire Piccolo character um, showed up. These are the things I liked about these were the things I liked about Dragon Ball, one other story element I liked. This would be abandoned when we got to Z, was that um despite your powers and special abilities, um you had, like Man of Christ said, you had to fear good moves, you had to have good technique in order to win fights, instead of what it would become later in Dragon Ball Z, whereas you had to be born the right race. I wish they would have kept with the Dragon Ball formula, with the Dragon Ball formula, with the Dragon Ball formula. So yeah, so yeah, these were the things I liked about Dragon Ball. These are the things I actually liked about the original Dragon Ball. Other things I don't like were well, like I said, this video was about positive things I like about the Dragon Ball. So I'll save the other negative stuff for a rant. Next is Dragon Ball Z. Now, Dragon Ball Z moves much faster than the original Dragon Ball, but it has some of the same pacing issues that the original Dragon Ball has, and this series at times is somewhat better. It is also at various points in the series worser than the original Dragon Ball, despite being probably the most popular half of the Dragon Ball Anthrology. I kind of think this is probably the worst. I don't like any of the sagas with the. It's a debate between the Cell or Boo saga for which is the worst saga. But I don't like any of sagas. I think the storyline is inconsistent. I think the storyline is terrible. It's inconsistent with the previous series, despite the fact they're supposed to both be in the same. Supposed to both be in the same dimension. When you get past the when you get past the Android saga, the first part of the Android saga, there are no more useful human characters with the exception of Piccolo. Then when you get past the Imperfect Cell saga, there are no more non-useful Saiyan characters. Non-useful Saiyan characters, and I hate it with how they changed it. The Saiyans are pretty much born. The Saiyans are pretty much born with really no weakness, and automatic power level, which made the human characters weak and useless, And believe it or not, this actually started. It kicked in post Imperfect Cell saga, but it actually started at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z. It actually started at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z. Everyone likes to make fun of Yamcha, but if you go back and read the manga portion of the Saiyan battle, it was pathetic. They didn't all the deaths were pretty much pathetic. Yeah, Yamcha being killed by Cyberman. Yeah, Chaozu sacrificing himself for pretty much his sacrifice doing really nothing to Nappa. Tien's Tri-Beam Cannon doing nothing to Nappa except damaging his armor, and then the badass scene in the anime where Tien fights Nappa. That's not in the manga. Tien gets his arm smashed, jumps in the air, tries to go for a ki blast. Nappa races up there, drops him, and before Nappa could finish him off, Krillin and Piccolo sense that Nappa is unguarded. They shoot in, attack. They fly in, attack him, and Nappa is back to fighting. Nappa is back to fighting him, and then Tien, while he's distracted, goes for his Tri-Beam Cannon and dies from exhaustion. Yeah, yeah. Then of course, Piccolo later sacrifices himself to save Gohan. So like I said, pretty much all deaths were pretty much pathetic, and then of course, because of the rules of the Dragon Balls, only Piccolo would be able to come back and fight Frieza, and then he seems to be evenly matched with Frieza's form, but Frieza reveals another form and beats the crap out of Piccolo. Not to mention it's inconsistent how Nail, who fared poorly against Frieza, somehow combining him with Piccolo's power. Piccolo, who barely trains, somehow has enough power to counter Frieza's second form, which is power level by this point is over 1,000,000. Yeah, like I said, inconsistent. The power levels are grossly inconsistent. Like Vegeta somehow going from 24,000, Vegeta in a short time going from 24,000 to being able to block a punch from Frieza, whose power level in his first form is 530,000. So how did he get that much power in a short amount of time? Even on Earth, he was 18,000, and then of course he was 18,000. Of course, he got a power boost which took him to 24,000. But how did he get 530,000? Like I said, in a short amount of time. And so like I said, inconsistent powers. The only thing I like was the characters. Pretty much this is a continuation of Goku's adult life, and it also focused on the growth and maturization of his friend Krillin, and the growth of Gohan, the development and growth of Gohan, Piccolo, Vegeta, and of course Trunks, and later and later Goten. This series is much more serious than the previous series and is much more action oriented and action oriented and much darker than the previous series, but it's still the same childish crap as, pretty believe it or not, the same childish crap as the first series, especially when we get around to the Boo Saga. Um, Boo Saga. So things I liked about this series was Trunks, Gohan, especially Future Gohan, Bardock. The history of Trunks and the Bardock specials, those two movies alone are better than the entire franchise right there. They're not only were they better than the entire franchise, but they not only were they better than the entire sagas that they were connected to, they were better than the entire franchise that came after each of these films, from action to characters to story and everything. So Gohan, Bardock, the Super Saiyan, which I remember how awesome that was back when I saw it for the first time um, as a kid. Then Gohan's Super Saiyan 2, Trunks' Ultra Super Saiyan, and of course get to the Buu Saga, seeing the Super Saiyan 3, Gohan's ultimate ability, the concept of fusion, and all the cool key blasts and powers the characters had. So these were the things that were good about Dragon Ball Z. Oh yes, and finally, I loved Ocean Dub, and Funimation dub really wasn't that good, but they had several cool tracks I like and several cool voice actors. Um, so yeah, this was Dragon Ball Z. I'll continue with the negative stuff, and like I said, in a rant on my Doug A798 channel. Now for Dragon Ball GT, which, believe it or not, this is probably the only part of the Dragon Ball anthology that I actually like and enjoy. I think Dragon Ball GT was the best and was a total improvement over Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z despite the flaws. I used to hate Dragon Ball GT. Believe it or not, when Dragon Ball GT first came on about what was it? When Dragon Ball GT first came on about 12 what came here about 12 years ago, 12 to 13 years ago, I was a huge fan of Dragon Ball GT. I actually saw a little bit of Dragon Ball GT before it aired. I was a huge fan of Dragon Ball GT, and as a kid thought it was much better than Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z had just ended and they were still on reruns, and I was ready for GT. I remember going to Blockbuster and renting episodes 12 through 16 of Dragon Ball GT, which pretty much cover the Doctor Mew, the Doctor Mew General Rildo saga, the prelude to the Baby Saga of Dragon Ball GT, and then I remember downloading the rest of the series on using a downloading website called Imish. I stopped using this because it had virus, and I was forced to get rid of those files. But I downloaded the rest of it and watched the rest of it, and then of course I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Then when I got older, my taste has improved. My taste in animes and cartoons and stuff improved. I started hating the series, especially when I got to watch it over in English and see all the plot holes, all the inconsistencies and stuff. Then of course when Naruto was coming out, and when Dragon Ball Evolution was being able to come out, I had to defend those. So I started hating GT even more, even more. But after rewatching the entire Dragon Ball, the original Dragon Ball trilogy over again, Dragon Ball Z, and Dragon Ball GT, despite the inconsistencies with the previous series, you watch it as an adaptation, it's pretty good, and it's actually the best of the Dragon Ball Anthrology. If you watch it as an adaptation, which it pretty much is, because not only are there inconsistencies. There are differences in the story from the previous two series, such as hell. In the original series, it was said in the original series that in hell you don't get a body in hell, and only characters like Goku got to keep their bodies and got to keep their bodies. Yet in GT, when everyone breaks out of hell, you see everyone with bodies. Then of course hell was different in this series. In this series in hell, you're forced to walk and wander in a place of emptiness. It was something like that, which that was completely different from what they described hell was in the original Dragon Ball series. Like I said, that different stories. Then of course Cooler, when the bad guys are escaping hell, you can see Cooler in the front. In the if you look closer, you can see Cooler, who is not canon. He's not canon. That's from the animated movie. Cooler is not canon. Then of course, so like I said, then of course, the various plot holes, like when they fought Super 17. Somehow in this universe, combining two Super 17s, which they say is as strong as Perfect Cell, is somehow stronger than Oob and Gohan. Oob, Gohan, and Vegeta, who all by this point, Vegeta's a Super Saiyan 2. Gohan, in this version, I think is a Super Saiyan 2 when he should be Ultimate Gohan Mystic, and Oob is the reincarnation of Majin Buu, who is stronger than Cell and Android 17. So how is Super 17 stronger than them? Then they fight Super 17 for a long time without becoming Super Saiyan. When you're fighting 17, you need to transform into your most powerful form right away. You're fighting Android 17. Android 17. Then Baby's power level is inconsistent. Somehow Baby taking control of Vegeta at Super Saiyan 1 or 2, I can't tell, is somehow stronger than Goku at Super Saiyan 3. Then of course the other Super Saiyan forms don't appear to exist in this series. They go from Super Saiyan to Super Saiyan 3 to Super Saiyan 4, whereas the Ascended Saiyan, the full power Super Saiyan, and the Ultra Super Saiyan, these forms aren't even seen. So like I said, they have several differences with the original. Series, such as the Black Star Dragon Balls. Dragon Balls, which makes this more of an adaptation. They even have another improvement was a completely different animation style. I love the animation style. The animation style reminds me of X-Men, the animated series, and Batman, the animated series, is much more darker and edgier versus the cartoonish BS of the original two series. The original two series. Also love the darker and more serious tone, with the earlier seasons having the same comedic tone of the original Dragon Ball, with the latter seasons having the seriousness and the dramatic tone that existed in Dragon Ball Z. And I thought this series captured both tones much better than both of the original Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z did. I also love things like the Super Saiyan 4, Baby Vegeta, Omega Shinron, Legic, Super Android 17. Better villains in my opinion, and I love the while the Black Star Dragon Ball, the Shadow Dragon Saga, while that wasn't really all that good, the finale with Goku and the Z Fighters fighting Omega Shinron was good too. So was Super Saiyan 4 Goku's fights with Ice Shinron and Nova Shinron, the flame one, who turned out to be the only dragon who was a good guy. I thought that was always pretty cool. Then of course you had what else? Dragon Ball. Then of course you had um oh yes, the Black Star Dragon Ball Saga. This wasn't good, but I did love the team of Goku, Trunks, and Pan. And I love Trunks and Goten in this series much more than I did in the original series. In the original series, Goten wasn't that much different than Goku and Gohan. Not only was he not that much different from them, he was useless in comparison to them. The only time him and Trunks were useful was when they became Gotenks. In this series, he's more of a ladies' man, has a completely different personality to Goku and Gohan. Completely is completely his own character in this series, and Trunks is more personality wise is more like the future Trunks, the future Trunks. I didn't like the young cocky Trunks from Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball. And I didn't mind them being weak because I never liked them being Super Saiyan. So I'm happy that there are more powerful characters and there's a much more powerful Super Saiyan form in the Super Saiyan 4, which in my opinion brought the restores credibility to the legend of the Super Saiyan, to the Super Saiyan, and love Vegeta's character in this series too. I couldn't stand him in the original Dragon Ball series, but here he's a much better character in this series than what's in than he was in the original Dragon Ball. Also, much better fight scenes. They in this series, in my opinion, managed to combine cool martial arts with powerful characters. Something, in my opinion, the last series really couldn't do. But this series, in my opinion, did it much better. So, like I said, awesome series and an emotional ending with them looking back at the end of Dragon Ball, with them looking back at the entire Dragon Ball series and giving the franchise a proper send off. Much better than the endings to Dragon Ball Z. And much way better than the next Dragon Ball trilogy I'm about to talk about. And the next one is Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods. In my opinion, this right here is absolutely terrible. Terrible. The only thing I can say about Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods in the new Dragon Ball series is the continuing development of Hercule, Vegeta, and of course, later, Goku finally advancing those characters. But this, first off, is boring. One thing you cannot do me in these films, you cannot bore me. Number one is boring. Number two, it resembles nothing epic. The whole thing feels like a filler episode of the original Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. And hell, watching a filler episode of those shows is much better than watching this crappy show. Next, the voice act. Next is the oh yeah, the only other good thing I guess would be finally improving the animation. Next, the various plot holes in the series. Poor fight sequences, not that much fight sequences. And Bills, my opinion, probably the absolute worst character in Dragon Ball. Bills and Wiz are the absolute worst characters in Dragon Ball. And finally, the whole plot, not only is it terrible, it's unoriginal. This whole plot is a ripoff of the Marvel comic Champion of the Universe. But like I said, yeah, there's nothing good about this. There is really nothing good about this. And this and the follow-ups made me quit Dragon Ball for a while. For a year, I've not done any videos on Dragon Ball. This is the first video in a year that I've done on Dragon Ball. Now let's talk about the next one, Fakatsu no F. Now this is much better than Battle of Gods. Much better action sequences, and much better animation, much better updated animation. But this is still terrible. First of all, various plot holes. Frieza's return was terrible. Avengers: Age of Ultron is what this movie should have been. In animated form. And the only thing good about this film was old characters like Roshi Tien, and Krillin and Piccolo being useful again in fighting fighting Frieza's armies. They screwed the Vegeta character. This had the worst ending ever, with Wiz turning back time and Goku destroying Frieza with a Kamehameha wave. Frieza somehow, who couldn't even beat a Super Saiyan, somehow managed to obtain a power that was stronger than not only the Super Saiyan, the Ascendant Saiyan, the Ultra Super Saiyan, the full power Super Saiyan, the Super Saiyan 2, 3, and finally Super Saiyan God. He managed to find a power that was stronger than all of that. And he got beat easily, and his return was just terrible. The whole film was garbage, and this made me quit Dragon Ball. This film and the next thing I'm about to talk about made me quit Dragon Ball for a year. I'll be talking more in my rants on Dragon Ball, how bad these were. Then of course next you had Dragon Ball Super. This right here, the 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 first 20 episodes were terrible. Just a repeat of Battle of Gods and Fakatsu no F. It's bad enough we had to watch both of these films, but both of these films had to be the first part of Dragon Ball Super in animated form. After the first three episodes were okay, nothing special. They were where were the characters now? But this whole new Dragon Ball trilogy, which consists of Battle of Gods, Fakatsu no F, and Super, is terrible. All the characters have lost their novelty and fun. It is just boring and dull and uninteresting, and they just use ideas from other series, like pretty much. Um, and now they're doing another tournament, another crappy tournament arc. Then the Future Trunks saga. Then of course a new Future Trunks saga with a Black Goku who is pretty much Superman Prime and Injustice Superman, and is nowhere near as good or epic as those things. So not only is it borrowing from these things, they don't use these things to make them good. It's just, oh, because that was good somewhere else, we're gonna insert it in our series. We're gonna insert it in our series. It's just terrible. Well, like I said, this was my anthology, my review, my Dragon Ball Anthrology review. This was also the introduction to other videos. I'm gonna be doing saga reviews of each series. All right, Doug out.